Because if I don't do my job, the people above me can't do their jobs. So that's something that I firmly believe in, and it's really about understanding the person that you're interacting with at that particular point in time.
So let's turn to your current role as president of Ford Motor Company, Southern Africa.
No, Africa.
Oh, sorry, I lied. Yes. President of Ford Motor Company, Africa. What was the path to this role?
If I go back, in 2006 is when I got the opportunity to go on an international service assignment and worked, so I went to Thailand. And at that particular point in time, if you had have asked me would I end up where I am today, the answer would have been no. Purely because of the fact that it was unclear, and I always felt that I was not worthy of actually going into the position, based on people like Lewis Booth, for example, who sat in the chair. Just had the most incredible respect and admiration for him. So the journey that I took was ultimately, did three and a half years in Thailand. Went from a big fish in a small pond to a small fish in a very big pond. Left South Africa thinking I knew everything about the automotive industry, realized very quickly that South Africa is a very small industry. Yeah. So that was a key awakening. Worked once again with, some really good leaders in the organization. Took on board life lessons from them. There were rough patches in that. When you go and work in a foreign country and you're out of your comfort zone, you're working with different people, and also working for different people from different nationalities, life can have some bumps in it that you need to go through, you need to learn. Yeah. From there, did a stint in China, but New Zealand was when I went to New Zealand and I became the managing director of our New Zealand operation. That for me was quite a key moment of realization, is that I was moving from a person who created information to a person who used information. And because I was going into a market, I knew nothing about the dealer network, I knew nothing about the product, I didn't know the legislative environment in New Zealand, but I was responsible for running a company with 68 people who were looking to me for strategic direction and day-to-day operations. So it really shifted my thinking in terms of how to tackle what I needed to do.
So that was an interesting thing you said. You said you went from using information,
creating information
to using information.
Yes.
It's an interesting way to think about it, because you had to now acquire information to use, rather than creating the information based on what you already knew.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So was this something that was planned? The Thailand journey, the road to president, or was it an opportunity thing that came along as you went?
I think it was a combination of the both. So I think the company certainly had a career path, or they had development plans for me that involved spending time offshore, and ended up being 10 years in total, working in 4 different countries. And I think that in itself was part of that grounding and that learning experience that happened. So definitely that was part of my career development. And then when I left Australia to come back to South Africa, my boss at the time and good friend Graham Wickman, he was actually guiding me behind the scenes, and he was involved in the discussions, and he said, look, they wanted you to go back to South Africa, the position's not the right position for you yet, just hold fire. Keep saying no, I'll tell you when it's time to say yes. And the position then changed. So when I came back in 2016, I came in as the marketing, sales and service director for Southern Africa. And I also had responsibility for Sub-Saharan Africa at that stage. And that was a point where now all of a sudden I had a big chunk of the business. So that was it was taking all my past experience and now giving me a large section of the business to now be responsible for. And that ultimately set me up for the opportunity when the MD's job became available, that I was kind of the person who was in the right position with the right background and right experience to be able to step into the role.
So taken opportunities as they presented themselves, but also had a bit of a path, or a bit of a looking glass into where you wanted the future to go.
Yeah, and I would say to a certain extent it was driven to myself by a certain extent. But I think that there were also a lot of people that had the bigger plan that were helping shape where I was going and what was happening.
Almost your supporters.
Yes, very much so.
To a large degree. So now you're in a leadership position. I mean, you've been in leadership positions in many places, but in your leadership position, I've heard sometimes that people say that leadership is a dark art. And not a dark art as in a bad art, but a dark art in that it's difficult to succeed because of different personalities, different groups of people, different cultures that exist within your followers. Does this resonate with you, and how did you develop as a leader?
So 100% it resonates with me. You've got such a wide variety of people that you work with that are working in your leadership team, leading different skill teams. And also working overseas, that was something that we really had to, I had to focus on. The key thing for me that I think that I learned in that journey was it's not for them to adapt to you, but rather you to adapt your leadership style for the person that you are dealing with.
Almost like servant leadership type.
Yes. And servant leadership is something I subscribe to. I mean, I believe organization charts are all drawn the wrong way. The leader should be at the bottom, because if I don't do my job, the people above me can't do their jobs. So that's something that I firmly believe in, and it's really about understanding the person that you're interacting with at that particular point in time, being in the moment, focusing on that person 100%, but also knowing them well enough to know what their motivations are, what their triggers are, what inspires them, what motivates them, what turns them off, and adapting your leadership style to that person's characteristics, strengths, weaknesses, and getting the best out of them.
So that's a tough thing to do, because what you're describing there is almost being a little bit of a chameleon. Because
100%. I do call myself a leadership chameleon.
You've got to adapt your style in a room with different people, one-on-one or groups of people, depending on those personalities. Not that you're fake, but it's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah. I always believe that there's certain principles that I will never compromise on. So punctuality, honesty, putting issues on the table, talking about them transparently, being respectful to people, so if you're in a group situation or a team meeting, never ever disrespect the other person, and that's something that
play the ball, not the person.
Yeah, 100%, and work collaboratively, solve the issue together, agree, get on, do it. In the one-on-one situation, certainly that's an area where I spend a lot of time actually, coaching people to a certain extent, but understanding what's, and I also look at it, on the basis of you get the whole person that comes to work. So it's very important to understand what's going on in the person's life without being intrusive, but there are family issues that will be happening. There'll be issues that will be taking place that are affecting a person. And be cognizant of that and make sure that you take that into consideration as you are asking for things to be delivered or tasks to be completed.
Well, you want the whole human to show up.
Yes.
And we can't really separate ourselves personally and work. You're bringing your person to work.
Correct.
So I firmly believe in that. You've got to understand a little bit more about that whole person rather than just looking at them as a machine that's here to perform a function. So that resonates with me a lot. So you've worked in different environments and countries. And we all know South Africa is a diverse nation, different people from different places. I mean, even people from Durban versus people from Joburg are different, and versus people from Cape Town, or maybe even people from Kimberley. But you've worked in places like Thailand, China, New Zealand, Australia. What's your experience been like dealing with the different cultures and languages? And how did you manage to adapt to these different environments?
I think going overseas, one of the things, when we made the move overseas, I think the diversity of South Africa helped us prepare and be open-minded about what we were going to experience. You the individual, you the odd one out, because now you're a South African who's gone to Thailand or gone to China. It's not about them adapting to you, it's about you adapting to them. So for me, it was always about, engage with the person, understand, remember English is not their first language. They are actually compromising and speaking English to me for my benefit because I can't speak their home language, in the case of China and Thailand.
Yes.
So, make the effort, so still speak a smattering of Thai, speak a smattering of Mandarin, But it's just to break the ice and to be able to acknowledge the fact that they are ultimately going to end up switching to English for my benefit. But it's about being respectful, understanding the culture, and listening to people, and being in the moment and embracing it. One of the things that we did, especially in Thailand, was we didn't want to live in an area where all the expats lived. So we actually, I remember on the first day that we went house hunting in Thailand, they took us to where all the Americans live, and we kind of looked at this and went, no, this is not going to work. And then we directed them to literally the opposite end of the city, and it was close to where the new airport was going to open up. And there were not a lot of foreigners, or as you called in Thailand, you're called a farang. And we decided that there was a new housing estate that had been built there, and we found a lovely house in there, and we lived there for 3.5 years and had an absolutely fantastic time. And we met so many different people from so many different nationalities that became our community. So I think it's about the diversity of South Africa that prepped us for what we were what we were going to go into. So respect everybody's differences.
I suppose, from a diversity point of view, South Africa is one of the countries that probably can prepare you the best for that kind of environment. Can you speak any of those languages still?
I speak enough Thai to get by.
Okay.
I can barter in the markets, I can order food. Definitely my favorite dishes.
How long did it take you to learn?
Probably about a year before I felt really comfortable in certain settings. Certainly I'm not going to be able to go and do conversational Thai. Mandarin is probably one of the hardest languages I've ever tried to learn. And
isn't Mandarin an ancient language?
It's an ancient language, but also it's got 5 tones. So, and don't even try understand the characters to read it. I admire people who are fluent in Mandarin, can read it and can write it.
Wow.
It is insanely complex.
So let's turn our focus a little bit to Ford, and talk about the leadership role that you took in getting the investment from Ford for $1 billion, that's billion with a B, US dollars, which is 16.2 billion rand. Well, I think it's a little bit more than that now in today's exchange rate, but $1 billion US dollars. And what does this investment mean for the South African consumer and the South African economy specifically? And then we can get into your new product, the Ranger.
So the investment that Ford Motor Company made for me was just such a boost in confidence, because there's a lot of people who go a long way saying bad things about South Africa, and we certainly score a lot of own goals, and there's a lot of issues that we really need to overcome. But I always believe that government's not going to solve all of our problems by themselves. Business has got to step in, and business has got to be part of the solution. Our way of being part of the solution is to encourage people to bring investment to South Africa. And the investment that Ford Motor Company made, we'd made the decision that we were going to build on the footprint that we had with the previous generation Ranger, and that we would gear ourselves up for the next gen Ranger that we're in the process of launching now. There were key enablers that needed to take place, and the decision, so the company had set aside the funds. What we really needed to do was convince the government that we needed the special economic zone that's now adjacent to our facilities.
Okay.
And that was really where I got rolled up my sleeves and had meetings with key individuals in government in terms of convincing them how important this was, but the fact that we were actually going to deliver a potential of 2% to GDP for South Africa just from one company.
Yeah.
And that was all of the enablers that we were working on, and that we were really convincing everybody. And I think when you put a compelling story in front of government officials that is related to investment, to jobs, to economic activity, sustainability, you do get certain people's attention. You've got to go, it is not a linear process, I will say that right up front. But I think perseverance and consistency in communication and engagement is really what made the difference with myself and the team that worked on it.
And did you find government receptive?
Certain tiers or certain sectors within government were very receptive. Our previous Premier of Gauteng, David Makura, was absolutely instrumental. I remember having a meeting with him in 2019. He was busy on the election campaign for the ANC in the build-up to the elections. And we managed to find a slot in his calendar on a Friday afternoon. We thought initially, so this, my government affairs director at this stage, Doreen Vermali, and myself went to go and have a meeting that we thought was 45 minutes. Ended up being a 3-hour engagement over lunch with him.
Wow.
And he got the conversation that we were having and the severity of what we were putting in front of him. And he made a commitment and he said, give me a month, we'll get together. 5 weeks later, we got together and he walked up to me and the first thing he said is, Neale, I'm sorry, I'm 10 days late, but I think you're going to like what we got to say. And that was the kickstart.
Wow.
And it led to November the 5th, we had a groundbreaking ceremony with President Ramaphosa to begin the construction phase of the special economic zone that now has upwards of 12 factories building parts that have been fed into our assembly operation in Silverton to build the next gen Ranger.
That is absolutely incredible. And
Search AutoTrader.